Close your eyes, dear listener, and let the night carry you back. Outside your window, perhaps a soft wind stirs the curtains. Maybe a candle burns nearby, its flame swaying gently, casting long, flickering shadows on the wall. The day has folded itself away. Now, in this quiet space between wakefulness and dreams, we begin our journey, not forward, but back. Back through the winding corridors of time, to an age when the world was stitched together not by science and reason, but by faith, fear, and wonder. Wherever you are, whether nestled beneath heavy blankets in a bustling city apartment or reclining in a peaceful countryside cottage, know that you are not alone. You're joined now by countless others, all listening under the same sky. Some hear these words as streetlights hum outside their window. Others may lie in a room filled with silence so deep they can hear the turning of the earth. But tonight, you and I are gathered here together, as if around an ancient hearth where stories once glowed like embers and the past lived on in every whispered word. Welcome to a journey through medieval Europe. Not the Europe of kings and castles you may have seen in storybooks, but something stranger, softer, and altogether more dreamlike. We won't rush. There's no need. Time moves differently here. You may feel yourself sinking slowly into your pillow, your breath deepening, your thoughts growing quieter. That's just the way of things on a night like this. Imagine, if you will, a world where laws were not merely rules written in dusty tomes, but sacred decrees believed to come from God himself. Where justice was often a matter of signs and omens, and even the stars above were consulted to settle disputes. A world where not only men and women stood trial, but animals, objects, even inanimate things like a bell or a cartwheel could be called to account. It may sound absurd to modern ears, but to those who lived it, this was the fabric of life, a tapestry woven with threads of belief, necessity, and age-old tradition. These laws were strange, yes, but in their strangeness they held a kind of order. They made sense of a world that was unpredictable, sometimes cruel, and always deeply mysterious. As we prepare to unravel that tapestry together, I invite you to breathe slowly, to let your body grow heavy and your mind grow light. Let go of the day that's past. You are in no rush. There's nowhere else to be. Only this moment matters, this soft unraveling of time. And while you're here, if you find peace in these stories, consider joining us again. Subscribe, or simply return when the world feels too loud and your thoughts need a place to rest. You'll always be welcome by the fire. So, wherever you are, and however you feel, know that this night is ours to share. Together, under the stars, we'll wander into tales both curious and forgotten, starting with one of the strangest of all, the trials of animals. Yes, you heard right. In medieval courts, creatures great and small were summoned to stand trial for their crimes. But that, dear listener, is where our path begins. In the heart of medieval Europe, beneath a gray and listening sky, there lies a village square. The cobblestones are warm from the sun, though the mood among the gathered townsfolk is unusually hushed. A makeshift courtroom has been set up near the chapel steps. Farmers, children, and elders crowd close, their breath a soft murmur in the summer air, heavy with the scent of hay and old wood. Today, something extraordinary is taking place. A sow, large and sluggish, is being led into the square by two bailiffs. Her hooves clack awkwardly on the stones. Around her neck is a rope. On her body, a tattered tunic, hanging crooked and soiled. And in the eyes of this crowd, she is not merely an animal. She is a criminal. Imagine the magistrate's stern voice echoing over the gathering. This sow has defied the order of creation, and justice must be served. A scribe sits nearby, quill poised, recording the proceedings with solemn care. The charge is grave. The sow has killed a young child. The child's family stands by, shrouded in black. A priest mutters a prayer under his breath. There is no laughter, no mocking of the process. This is not a spectacle, it is law. To our modern ears it may sound absurd, even grotesque. But in that world, such trials were not merely symbolic. They reflected a deep, pervasive belief that all living beings were bound to divine justice. In this cosmic order, animals were more than instinct-driven creatures. They were moral agents, subject to punishment, held accountable by a higher standard. Just as a thief or a murderer might face the gallows, so too might a beast that shed innocent blood. The courtroom, such as it is, obeys all the rites of formal justice. Witnesses are called, the facts are spoken, and in time, the sentence is passed. The sow is found guilty. Her execution is scheduled at dawn. That night, someone might place food near her pen. Another might whisper a prayer for her soul. Or perhaps no one speaks at all. At sunrise, she is led once more into the square, her tunic draped over her back, her eyes vacant, and there, before the eyes of the townspeople, she is hanged. A silence falls. Some cross themselves, others turn away. But the law has spoken, and in its strange, rigid fairness, justice, as it was understood, has been done. To them, even a beast's actions rippled through the divine fabric of the world. In their minds, the world was a kind of sacred tapestry, and every thread, human or animal, held tension and meaning. When one thread was torn, the pattern was disturbed. Restoration could only come through judgment. This may seem cruel to us now, even surreal. But it was rooted in a sincere belief in cosmic harmony, in the idea that sin was not limited to the human soul, but echoed in all creation. The trial of a sow, then, was not only about blame, it was about balance, about reaffirming the moral rhythm of a chaotic world. And this sow was not alone, for in medieval courts, the accused were not always beasts of flesh and blood. Some were far stranger, objects, bells, even trees, brought forward to face judgment. A strange world, yes, but a deeply ordered one, built on faith, tradition, and an unyielding desire for justice, even when justice wore the face of tragedy. The sky growls above a quiet German town, sometime in the late 14th century. Rain lashes against steep rooftops, and the wind howls down narrow streets like a spirit unbound. In the heart of the storm, the church bell tolls, loud, urgent, almost defiant. Each clang echoes across the trembling town until finally the tempest shatters windows, uproots trees, and floods the fields. When morning comes and the villagers count their losses, a whisper passes among them. It was the bell called the storm, and so, within days, the bell stands trial. It rests in the center of the town square, cradled in wooden scaffolding. The storm has passed, but the fear remains. A priest, robed in black, speaks on its behalf. "This bell," he proclaims, "only sang God's praise." Yet the townsfolk murmur in reply, their eyes sharp with suspicion. "Its voice was angry," says one. "It called the winds," says another. The priest pleads, but the accusation has rooted deep. The trial continues, not as theater, but as solemn ritual. For to these people, this is justice. We might smile at the thought, a bell, tried as though it had hands and will. But in the medieval mind, this was no absurdity. They lived in a world animated by purpose, shaped by divine forces that breathed life into all things. In such a worldview, even objects bore the potential to sin or serve. Every tool, every stone, every bell had meaning beyond its material. It could bless, it could curse. The arguments unfold with strange logic. Witnesses recall the bell's uncanny tone the night the storm struck. Some speak of its age, its casting, the iron from which it came. Others recall a past priest who once warned that it rang with too much pride. Slowly, the scales tip. The verdict is reached. The bell is found guilty. But it is not destroyed. Destruction would risk insult to the sacred. Instead, a sentence is passed that walks the line between judgment and mercy. The bell is to be removed, carried from the tower it once crowned, paraded through the village as if exiled. At the edge of town, beneath a willow tree, it is buried in consecrated ground. The villagers watch as earth is poured over its bronze shoulders. And with this symbolic banishment, Peace is restored. In their eyes, the world was alive with purpose, every object a thread in God's design. To let the bell remain would be to allow imbalance, to leave a wound unhealed in the tapestry of creation. But to judge it, to lay the matter to rest through solemn rite, was to reaffirm order, and so the bell sleeps beneath the soil, silent at last. The tower above remains empty for years. A different bell is cast, one with softer tones, more humble in song. But the story of the trial is told again and again, not just as a tale of fear, but as proof that even silence must be earned. And the line between living and not was never quite as clear as we now believe. For in medieval justice, everything breathed. Stones remembered, iron wept, and the clang of a bell could echo far beyond its sound. Now, dear listener, the night deepens, and with it, the strangeness of justice grows darker still. For next comes trial not of object or beast, but of human soul tested by fire, water, and divine judgment. Rain falls softly over the village of Hildesheim, streaking the narrow windows of its chapel and turning the earth to mud. It is 1349, a year thick with fear and famine, when rumors carry faster than wagons, and justice rests not in written law, but in the will of heaven. Villagers gather in silence beneath dripping cloaks. Some clutch rosaries, others cross themselves. All eyes are fixed on the churchyard path, where a young man kneels in the wet grass, trembling, soaked, and accused. The charge is theft, a loaf of bread, a silver ring. No one can quite agree. But the weight of suspicion clings to him like the rain, and so he must face God's judgment. Not in words, not in witness, but in trial by fire. Specifically, the ordeal of hot iron. A brazier is lit near the altar. Flames leap and crackle, spitting sparks into the gray morning. Within the coals lies a rod of iron, its tip already turning red with heat, glowing like a fallen star. The priest approaches, robes heavy with damp, and raises his hand. His voice is solemn, almost sorrowful. Let God's fire reveal the truth. The iron is blessed with holy water and incense, as though it were both sword and sacrament. The accused bows his head. His lips move in desperate prayer, a whisper no one else hears. He is young, no more than 20. His hands are calloused from labor, but they will not protect him now. When the moment comes, time stills. He rises, takes the iron from the priest's gloved hands, and begins to walk. 9 paces across the muddy yard, 1 for each day, Christ hung in the tomb, some say. The rod hisses in the rain. Steam curls from his palms as the metal sears flesh. Each step is a prayer, each blister a plea for divine mercy. He does not cry out, but his eyes glisten, locked on the chapel door ahead, as though salvation might lie within. Villagers watch without speaking. In this act, they see not cruelty, but clarity. For in their world, only God could pierce the shadows of guilt and lie. The ordeal is not punishment, it is purification. A test of faith and truth, bound together in flame. When the 9 steps are done, the iron is dropped. The man collapses. His hands are quickly bound in clean linen, and the priest blesses them again. For 3 days he will wait, untouched. If his wounds heal clean, it means he was innocent, protected by grace. But if they fester, if rot sets in, then guilt is confirmed. Judgment delivered not by man, but by miracle. To us, it seems barbaric. But in that time, it was a divine scalpel, cutting through doubt with the blade of belief. People did not merely watch, they believed. And that belief lent the ritual its terrible power. It was faith that burned hottest. For the accused, those 3 days would stretch into eternity. Not just pain, but isolation, wondering if God would speak through flesh, whether the heat revealed sin, or merely the helplessness of being human. As the storm begins to fade and the villagers return to their homes, the chapel stands quiet once more. But in that quiet, a fire still glows, the memory of heat, of judgment, of a world where the divine spoke through wounds. And now, dear listener, we descend deeper still into water, where truth either floats or sinks. Mist coils low along the riverbank. It is early morning in the year 1350, and the air hangs heavy with breath and unspoken fear. Villagers line the shore, hoods drawn tight, eyes wary. Their prayers are hushed, tangled with murmurs of suspicion. At the water's edge stands a woman, wrists bound with coarse rope, dress soaked from the damp, and eyes fixed on the water that will soon judge her. She has been accused of witchcraft. Perhaps a cow sickened under her care. Perhaps a child's fever did not break, or maybe her silence, her refusal to shrink under the weight of superstition, made her dangerous. It does not take much. In this age, the line between healer and heretic is paper thin, and fear does the rest. She does not cry. Her breath is steady, though her hands tremble against the bindings. Nearby, the priest clutches his book of prayers. The magistrate reads the accusation. And the villagers wait, uncertain, watching, always watching. The ritual is simple. The woman is lowered into the river by ropes looped beneath her arms. The cold bites like knives. Her body stiffens. She sinks slightly, then rises, buoyed by the chill and her bound limbs. To them, this moment holds all the answers. For in medieval belief, water was not just nature. It was purity incarnate, holy, sacred, and incorruptible. It rejected the guilty. If she floated, it meant the water had cast her out, refusing to receive her sin. If she sank, it meant she was innocent, embraced by the pure. But innocence was no protection from drowning. The priest murmurs, "If the river takes her, she is pure." But her gasps, sharp and wet, echo through the crowd like a question no one wants to answer. She begins to float. It could be the folds of her dress, the angle of the ropes, the chill air catching beneath her. But in the eyes of the crowd, it is proof of what they feared. Guilt, spoken not by witness or confession, but by the river itself. She is pulled back to shore, shivering and silent. The sentence will follow. Perhaps the stake, perhaps the rope. She has survived, but that survival is a mark of guilt. In this cruel paradox, innocence was a death sentence, and guilt a fleeting reprieve. And so the villagers leave, heads bowed, unsure whether justice has been done, or simply enacted. In their world, divine truth required no logic, only ritual. Yet somewhere, even in their certainty, a seed of doubt lingers. Could water truly bear judgment? Could the river mirror God's will, or merely reflect their fear? As the mist curls once more over the surface, it swallows the echoes of accusation and leaves only silence, heavy, unresolved, and timeless. Now, dear listener, prepare yourself for a different kind of judgment, one not of water or flame, but of strength. For in our next chapter, justice takes the form of a duel, where the sword speaks in place of truth. The morning mist lifts slowly from the grassy field just beyond the town's edge. It is the year 1348, and today, justice will not be read from a scroll or proclaimed by a judge. It will be decided by steel. A rough circle has been cleared and roped off, its borders marked by wooden stakes. Nobles sit in raised wooden stands, cloaks pulled close against the breeze. Their expressions are mixed, some eager, some solemn. Around them, peasants jostle for space, whispering, wagering, watching. In the center, two men prepare to fight. One is a tall, broad-shouldered knight in polished armor, his sword freshly whetted, his eyes calm beneath the visor. He was hired, a seasoned champion brought in by a wealthy merchant, embroiled in a bitter land dispute. The other is a farmer. His tunic is threadbare, and though his frame is strong from years of labor, it carries no art of war. His eyes dart from the crowd to his opponent, and his grip on the borrowed sword is stiff, unfamiliar. He stands not for sport, but for the land his family has tilled for generations, now in danger of being claimed by force masked as law. The Lord overseeing the trial raises his hand. "Let God guide their blades," he declares. The crowd stills. And then, it begins. Steel clashes in the cold air. The knight moves with precision, each strike deliberate. The farmer counters clumsily, stepping back, breathing hard. Dirt kicks up beneath their feet. The onlookers cheer, flinch, shout advice. For a moment, the fight seems almost even, but it does not last. The knight feints left, then strikes right. The farmer stumbles. A slash to the leg brings him down, and the sound of the crowd swells with a mix of triumph and something colder. Relief, perhaps, that justice has been served. But has it? In the minds of many watching, this was not just a contest of strength. It was proof, or so they believed, that God favored the righteous. Victory was divine verdict. If you were innocent, you would survive. If guilty, your defeat would seal your fate. Yet beneath this faith lies a quieter truth. The farmer had no armor, no training, no coin to hire someone stronger. His fall was not merely the result of battle. It was the law affirming his poverty, cloaked in the illusion of divine will. And so, as the knight lowers his blade and the crowd disperses, one question lingers, unspoken but heavy. Did God truly guide the blade, or did wealth guide the outcome? For in this world, justice was often for sale. Might made right, and belief made it acceptable. The farmer's body is dragged from the field. The land he fought for will pass into the merchant's hands. His family will move, or serve, or vanish into the margins of the town's story. Yet his struggle leaves behind more than silence. It leaves doubt, a small fracture in the grandeur of tradition. And now, dear listener, let us turn from the roar of the crowd to a quieter figure. One who holds no sword, yet brings death with every judgment. A man feared and needed. Alone, yet at the center of power's machinery. The executioner awaits. Beyond the town walls, past the last cobbled lane and the withering hedgerows, stands a cottage marked by a red-painted door. No children play nearby. No candles flicker in the windows after dark. It is 1360, and within lives the executioner. His world is silent, save for the rustle of wind and the occasional knock from desperate visitors. He performs the town's darkest duty, but his dwelling lies where even light feels reluctant to linger. Each week, he walks into the square in his dark tunic and hood. Crowds gather in hushed reverence, not for him, but for what he is about to do. A life is ended swiftly by his blade. A judgment fulfilled, a crowd satisfied, and yet no one dares thank him. No one dares meet his eyes. By night, he becomes something else entirely. When infants burn with fever, or a merchant collapses from a sudden ache, desperate footsteps find their way to that red door. The very hands that ended a life in the morning now prepare salves and poultices by candlelight. He knows the body, its veins, its fragile hinges, its quiet secrets. Not from books, but from years of parting flesh at the town's command. Still, the same townsfolk who whisper, "His hands are cursed," knock when illness strikes too close. And when the danger passes, they retreat quickly, murmuring prayers against his presence. He is a paradox wrapped in cloth, both feared and needed. A shadow cast by justice, necessary for its form, yet shunned for its shape. He may not enter the market. He may not marry a townswoman. His coin is accepted with a glance away, and no seat is ever offered beside him at the tavern, should he dare enter. But he knows their faces, all of them. He knows which men tremble behind bravado, which women avert their eyes but linger too long. He remembers who screamed, and who wept, and who watched his work with a frightening calm. In his solitude, he finds moments of strange peace. Tending his herbs, shaping iron tools, wrapping linen with care. He understands the fragile balance between life and death more intimately than any priest or magistrate. In his knife lay death and healing, a blade of two truths. He does not seek friendship, for he knows it would be refused. Nor does he plead for respect. He has his duty, grim, precise, and constant. And so he walks the line that no one else dares, between justice and silence, between judgment and mercy. There is dignity in this exile, though no one speaks of it, just as there is cruelty in the laws he serves, though they wear robes of righteousness. But cruelty, as we shall now see, often took unexpected forms, not in dungeons or swords, but in the ink of ledgers and the weight of coin. Let us now turn to the strange world of medieval debt, where imagination turned poverty into punishment. It is a hot summer day in the year 1355. The market square of a bustling French town is alive with its usual chorus: the clatter of hooves, the bargaining cries of merchants, the rustle of linen stalls in the breeze. But in the middle of the square, beside a weathered post, a man sits on a low wooden stool, dressed in a tattered white shift. His shoulders are slumped, and his voice is hoarse. "I owe 10 shillings to Master Guillaume the baker," he cries aloud, again and again. Children point. A few giggle. Some grown-ups throw scraps of bread or small coins, some in mockery, others perhaps in guilty sympathy. His shame is both entertainment and instruction. Here, among the barrels of apples and bolts of wool, is justice on public display. This was not imprisonment, nor a fine behind closed doors. It was exposure, emotional and social. A punishment designed not to isolate, but to embed the shame into the memory of the town. Like ink on parchment, his disgrace was meant to be recorded not by scribes, but by the eyes and whispers of neighbors. The law did not merely want the debt repaid, it wanted balance restored, not to the debtor's purse, but to the social ledger. The humiliation, loud and persistent, was a symbolic cleansing. The louder he declared his failure, the more satisfied the watching world became. He cries, "I owe 10 shillings," as laughter drowns his shame. A herald stands nearby, ensuring the man repeats his confession every few minutes. It is not enough to be seen. He must speak his debt aloud, own it with his voice. It is as much theater as it is punishment. Some passers-by mutter prayers, a few drop alms into the bowl at his feet. Others scoff and shake their heads, whispering tales of his bad investments or drunken habits. Truth does not always matter. In the eyes of the town, disgrace is its own kind of justice. The man's pride ebbs with each insult. What began as stiff defiance softens into a weary slump. Eyes once lifted now stare at the dust. In medieval thought, such public shame was a strange hybrid of condemnation and compassion. It was meant to correct, but also to invite mercy. A poor man's redemption might lie in a stranger's pity, but only once his humiliation was complete. In their eyes, his disgrace was a warning, etched in the town's memory. It is not cruelty alone. It is a kind of emotional tax, levied not just on the debtor, but on the community's conscience. For some, it stirs kindness. For others, a smug sense of moral cleanliness. The punishment ends when the sun begins to dip. The man is dismissed quietly, his name now a whispered lesson. But the echoes linger. This was not a forgotten act in a dark cell. It was a chapter in the daily life of the town, as visible as a church bell, as enduring as gossip. Yet not all punishments were quite so visible. Some came in subtler, stranger forms, like the curious world of market regulations, where justice came not just with shame, but with a side of poetry. London, 1365. The market is at its peak, hawkers shouting prices, fishmongers slapping fresh catch onto wooden slabs, and the scent of roasted onions and wet hay mingling in the late morning air. But today, a different kind of spectacle draws the crowd. A cart rolls slowly through the cobbled street, led by a constable and trailed by laughter. Tied to the cart is a baker, red-faced and grim, with a rope around his neck. Hanging from it is not a sign, but a stale, misshapen loaf of bread, the very emblem of his crime. The assayer declares, "This loaf cheats the hungry," a herald shouts as they pass the stalls. The crowd roars its approval, children jeer, and some throw crumbs or peelings in mock disgust. Earlier that day, the market's assayer, the official tasked with weighing and inspecting goods, had sliced one of the baker's loaves in half, weighed it against a standard, and found it lacking. It was light by 2 ounces, a clear breach of the assize of bread. In a time when hunger stalked even the middle classes, this was no small deceit. Now, the punishment must match the crime, poetically, publicly. It is a justice designed not in silence, but in spectacle. Just as the baker's hand had skimmed off weight from a loaf, so now must the town strip him of dignity. His crime was hidden in ounces, his punishment measured in jeers. His shame was the town's lesson, baked into every loaf thereafter. To modernize, it seems absurd, but in this era, bread was sacred. It was not just food, it was fairness, it was life. A light loaf was not simply dishonest. It was an insult to the common trust, a theft hidden in crust and flour. The baker, trudging behind the cart, knows what is at stake. It is not just the day's humiliation, it is his livelihood. Who will buy bread tomorrow from the man who shamed the marketplace today? Yet one can't help but feel a flicker of sympathy. Perhaps the flour shipment was short. Perhaps his family was hungry too. The rules are strict, but life in the stalls is harder still. And so the punishment walks a fine line, meant to correct, not destroy. It seeks to restore balance, to remind the town that honesty weighs more than profit. When the parade ends, the baker is released quietly. The loaf is discarded. The whispers will last longer. In this world, where regulations were enforced with flair and flour, even a stale crust could become a symbol. Justice had rhyme, rhythm, and sometimes yeast. But food was not always dishonest. In fact, what people ate, or tried to, tells another tale altogether. And so, from markets to meals, we turn next to the struggles of the medieval diet itself. In the gray chill of a Highland morning in 1349, a soft drizzle tapped against the thatched roof of a low, mud-walled cottage. Inside, smoke coiled lazily from a small hearth, not from firewood, which was scarce, but from damp peat, barely alight. A mother hunched over a blackened pot, slowly stirring a thin porridge of oats and water, the only meal her family would have that day. Her hands moved mechanically, not with hope, but with habit. Behind her, 3 children sat cross-legged on the dirt floor, their cheeks hollow, eyes wide with the quiet desperation of hunger. "One more bowl, my love," she whispered to the youngest, masking the pangs in her own stomach with a forced warmth. Outside, the faint bleating of a goat reminded her of all they could not afford to eat. Just a few miles away, past a stretch of forest and a rising hill, banners fluttered atop the turrets of a stone castle. Within its great hall, warmth radiated from roaring fires and laughter echoed off the high wooden beams. The long banquet table groaned under the weight of roasted boar, pheasants glazed in honey, crusty breads dusted with saffron, and sweetmeats molded into shapes of lions and flowers. Goblets overflowed with spiced wine, and musicians plucked lively tunes as lords and ladies feasted in silks and furs. A nobleman raised his cup and declared with a hearty laugh, "To abundance," completely unaware that the village below simmered in hunger. The contrast was staggering, like 2 worlds sharing the same patch of earth but orbiting different suns. For the poor, food was sustenance stripped to its bare bones. Coarse grains, root vegetables when available, and on rare days, a slice of dried fish or a pigeon caught in a trap. Their meals were dictated not by appetite, but by survival, eaten in silence and washed down with sour ale or thin broth. For the noble class, however, dining was spectacle. Their larders brimmed with spices from the east, sugar imported at a king's ransom, and wines from foreign vineyards. A single feast could consume more than what a peasant family would see in a season. This wasn't merely a matter of wealth, it was a reflection of power. The ability to eat well meant control. Over land, over labor, over the very seasons that determined harvests. Food became a status symbol, a declaration of one's place in the divine order. The peasants' thin gruel was not just a meal, it was a reminder that they lived closer to the edge of mortality, where a failed crop or harsh winter meant starvation. And hunger was not just physical, it gnawed at pride and spirit. Parents watched their children grow pale and listless, weighed down by dreams of bread. In the fields, men pushed beyond exhaustion, chasing a harvest they'd scarcely taste. Even the act of eating became a quiet humiliation. To be full was to be lucky. To be hungry was simply normal. Yet through it all, there was resilience. Families found joy in sharing even the smallest meal, offering scraps to neighbors, whispering old stories to distract from growling bellies. Still, the injustice lingered like smoke in their lungs. In those days, food wasn't just about nourishment. It was a visible daily symbol of who mattered and who didn't. While one world raised golden goblets, the other clutched wooden spoons. The narrator now turns to the struggle of keeping food edible in such a world, and how preservation became a battle against time, decay, and the elements. Beneath a crooked cottage in a windswept coastal village, the cellar lay hidden, low-roofed, damp, and shrouded in shadows. The stone floor was slick with moisture, and the air stung with the sharp tang of brine and rotting wood. In one corner, barrels of freshly caught herring stood half-sealed, their silver bodies packed tightly between layers of coarse salt. Flies buzzed in lazy swarms near the ceiling, dodging the occasional flick of a cloth. A fisherman's wife worked alone in this cramped space. Her sleeves rolled to the elbows, fingers reddened and cracked from salt and cold. She muttered under her breath, "Salt it well, or we'll starve," as she layered another row of fish into the barrel. Her hands moved with practiced urgency, measuring salt by instinct, tamping it down until the fish vanished beneath a crusty layer. The brine soaked into her skin, roughening her touch, yet she handled each fish with the care of someone who knew what was at stake. In a world without ice or preservation machines, food was a daily gamble. The herring caught that morning would not last the week unless carefully prepared. Salting was most common near the sea. Inland, people smoked meat in soot-blackened chimneys or buried root vegetables in earth cellars. Pickling was a luxury, dependent on vinegar or ale, but each method had its risks. Too little salt and the meat rotted. Too much, and it became inedible. A mistake didn't just mean waste, it meant hunger. Or worse, sickness, as spoiled food bred illness in bellies already weak from want. Every meal eaten in winter carried a trace of fear. Was the pork salted enough? Did the dried beans mold in storage? A single foul smell could unravel weeks of work. In the humid seasons, rot worked faster than hands could fight it. Mice gnawed through sacks. Molds crept across cheeses. The cellar, meant to be a store of survival, often became a battleground. But this woman was skilled. Her cellar, though modest, held tight-packed barrels and hooks strung with drying herbs. She had learned through years of failure, when a summer heat wave turned their butter rancid, or a weak seal let damp ruin a crate of flour. Now she sniffed the air like a hound, checked barrels at sunrise, and stored herbs not for flavor, but to drive off pests. Each barrel in that room was a small victory. Each barrel was a battle won against time's decay, the villagers would say. They knew her reputation. Her salted fish lasted longest through the cold. Her smoked sausages rarely turned. Yet no one thanked her openly. Her work was invisible, taken for granted, until it failed. Contamination, they feared, came not just from nature, but neglect. Clean water was scarce. Rats were persistent. A careless hand could poison a family. And so, amid the darkness and the stench, she worked like a sentinel, guarding her household against an unseen siege. The cellar, humble and grim, was more than a pantry. It was where hope was salted and sealed, where the edge between life and death narrowed to a few grains of salt and the steadiness of a woman's hands. The narrator now turns from survival to deception, exploring how some traders twisted food itself into a trick, a silent betrayal of trust at the village market stalls. The market square bustled with noise and color on this spring morning in 1360. Hawkers cried their wares beneath flapping banners, while baskets brimmed with early greens, root vegetables, and salted meat. But at the edge of it all, a once popular ale stall sat quiet, its wooden casks unopened and untouched. Behind them stood a widow, her hands folded tightly in her apron, her eyes scanning the passing crowd that now avoided her stall like it carried a curse. Only weeks before, her ale had drawn steady traffic. Laborers, townswomen, Even friars would pause for a tankard of her brew, dark and filling, known for its comforting strength. But rising grain prices had crept like ivy around her margins. Barley had doubled, rent had remained fixed and merciless. Left with fewer options and 3 children to feed, she began to dilute the mix. Just enough, she thought, to make the malt stretch a little further. The change was subtle at first. A thinner taste, a paler color but still drinkable. She stirred in silence at dawn, whispering apologies into the foam, praying no one would notice. But tongues in a medieval town were as sharp as blades. Whispers turned to complaints. A disappointed mason told a friend, who told another, and soon the local ale assayer came calling. The assizes of ale were strict, as unforgiving as the hunger that had driven her to bend the rules. Quality and quantity were regulated by law, tested by appointed officials who carried authority in the name of the crown. The assayer took a ladle from her cask, sniffed, sipped, and frowned. She waited, her apron damp from nervous hands. She pleads, "I had no choice, but the assayer's verdict is cold." She was summoned to the center of the market 2 days later. Her name read aloud. Her crime declared. The punishment followed. No jail, but public shame. A mark of betrayal hung in the air heavier than any fine. She stood in the pillory, her face burning beneath the gaze of neighbors, many of whom she had once served. Children laughed, someone tossed stale bread. Her youngest wept behind a cartwheel. Her eldest would not meet her eyes. The cask she had tampered with now sat beside her, overturned and emptied, the last of it soaking into the dust. Her ale, once a village staple, became a symbol of betrayal. When it was done, she returned home to a shuttered stall and a name now whispered with scorn. The same people who once praised her frugality now crossed the road to buy elsewhere. Her small acts of survival had become unforgivable in the eyes of a system that punished deception but ignored desperation. Food adulteration was a common scourge, not born of malice, but of scarcity. People added flour to pepper, chalk to bread, water to wine, not to cheat, but to endure. Each act was a silent gamble between feeding your children and keeping your dignity intact. The rules were written by those who never knew the price of oats on a hungry morning. Her downfall was not in the watering of ale, but in the poverty that poured it. The widow's story now fades into another tale, one not of deceit, but of sheer survival, in a season where the land gave nothing, and even honesty could not fill a stomach. The wind clawed through the gaps in the timber walls of the cottage, howling like a hungry beast. Inside, the air hung heavy with smoke and silence. A dying fire sputtered in the hearth, throwing thin orange light across the dirt floor, where 2 children huddled beneath a wool cloak, worn thin as parchment. Their cheeks were pale, their limbs twig-thin, their bellies distended from meals that offered little more than volume. In the larder, nothing remained but a scattering of oat dust and a lone shriveled onion. The salted meat was long gone. The turnips had rotted. Even the dried peas had been boiled to mush weeks ago. The mother scratched at the bottom of a clay jar for flour, her hands trembling as she measured enough to thicken a pot of boiled nettles. This was early spring in 1352, deep in the Hunger Gap, the cruel season between winter's end and the first harvest of spring. No green shoots had yet pushed through the thawed earth. The ground was softening, yes, but life had not returned. For peasants, this was the tightening noose of nature, slowly closing in just as hope peeked over the horizon. Outside, the father returned with empty hands and hollow eyes. No rabbit snared, no roots found, no bread offered from wealthier neighbors already stretched thin themselves. Still, he smiled for the children. The father whispers, "We'll make it to spring," his voice hollow. Dinner was a shared broth of bark-thickened water, one crust of bread softened for the youngest. The older child chewed slowly, pretending to be full. The younger only blinked, too tired to cry. Foraging was a daily ritual now, digging beneath hedgerows, clawing at frozen earth for wild garlic, nettles, or burdock root. Each bitter, stringy mouthful was a victory, each bite a defiance against the shadow of famine. They learned which leaves wouldn't kill, which mushrooms to avoid, which patches of grass might hide edible shoots. Each root dug from frozen earth was a small victory against death. But the toll was visible. Children stopped growing. Their skin hung loose or grew tight over bones. Mothers stopped bleeding. Grandparents faded into silence. This was hunger not as an event, but as a season. A drawn-out siege that spared no soul, rich or poor, though it feasted most heartily on the poor. Yet within this slow disaster bloomed small acts of resistance. Neighbors shared sour milk and half-baked loaves. Churches opened soup pots to beggars. A village widow passed around dried apples saved from last fall. It wasn't enough. It never was. But it said, "You are not alone." The hunger gap taught a bitter truth, that survival often meant more than food. It meant endurance, ingenuity, and the willingness to give even when you had nothing left. And when the first green shoot broke the soil, it was not just a plant, it was a promise. Now, from this bleak earth, the story turns sharply, toward the very opposite of want. Where peasants fought to stretch oats, nobles scattered saffron on roast goose. The narrator now leads us to spices, those distant luxuries that once stirred empires and never reached mouths like these. The hall shimmered with candlelight, its stone walls draped in tapestries of hunt and heraldry. Silver goblets gleamed beside golden platters, each laden with roasted peacock, its feathers reassembled and gilded for display. Servants moved like shadows, balancing trenchers piled with dishes whose aromas danced with heat and mystery. At the center of the table sat a steaming bowl of rice dyed yellow with saffron, the scent delicate and otherworldly. On a slab of wood, pork simmered in a sauce of cinnamon and cloves. A noblewoman sipped mulled wine, infused with nutmeg and cardamom, her jeweled fingers resting on the cup's stem as if touching something sacred. To dine like this was not merely to eat, it was to perform power. The Lord boasts, "This saffron traveled farther than any knight, as guests marvel." This was 1347, and in such noble feasts, spices did more than flavor. They whispered of conquest and wealth. Saffron from the Levant, pepper from India, cloves from the Moluccas. These were not mere ingredients, they were trophies, proof that the world could be bent to one's appetite. A single pound of cloves might cost more than a common man's yearly wage. To serve it was to declare supremacy, not generosity. Far below the manor's hill, in a thatched cottage dark with soot, a peasant woman stirred pottage with a sliver of onion and a bruised clove of garlic, her only flavor. Sometimes mustard seeds, pounded and mixed with vinegar, would add heat. But sugar, pepper, cinnamon? These were stories, not seasonings. To peasants, spices were as unreachable as the stars, seen from afar, never tasted. For peasants, a pinch of garlic was their only spice, their only luxury. And yet the taste of a meal could define one's place in the world. Nobles dined in excess to reinforce their separation, their plates a constellation of lands and riches. The more exotic the flavor, the more distant the source, the more prestigious the bite. Spices became edible proof of empire, traded across thousands of miles, carried by ship, camel, and coin. Their presence on a table marked the distance between survival and celebration, between garlic and ginger, between reality and spectacle. This inequality wasn't hidden, it was flaunted. Cooks in noble kitchens were prized not only for their skill, but for their knowledge of spice combinations. Recipes were guarded secrets. The colors, smells, and tastes of a feast became theater, with each course crafted to impress not the stomach, but the senses, and more importantly, the guests. The irony? Most nobles had dulled palates, overwhelmed by layers of sauce and spice. They could no longer taste the meat beneath the clove. But that was never the point. Taste was less important than appearance. Spice was less about pleasure than prestige. Meanwhile, peasants valued the sharp bite of wild garlic, the sting of mustard, the bitterness of herbs picked by hand. Their meals were humble, yes, but rooted in place, in need and truth. They seasoned not for pomp, but for preservation. Their simplicity was not chosen, it was enforced. And still, they made it matter. Now, having tasted the heights of noble flavor and the depths of peasant hunger, the narrative takes us to a place where both rich and poor gathered, though under very different circumstances. Royal feasts were spectacles of abundance, carefully choreographed to display order and hierarchy. And in the next breath, we descend into that theatrical excess. The great hall blazed with firelight, its high stone walls echoing with the sounds of harp and pipe. Tapestries fluttered slightly in the smoky air as nobles reclined beneath banners bearing the lion and the lily. Torches flickered along the colonnades, casting long shadows as liveried servants glided in procession, arms laden with wonders crafted more for awe than nourishment. At the head table, before a crowd of glittering courtiers, the first marvel arrived, a roasted swan, its feathers reattached and dusted with gold, neck arched in eternal elegance. Behind it, a towering sugar sculpture shaped like a fortress, turrets and battlements delicate as lace. Marzipan knights stood at its gates. Beside them, dishes of venison glazed in honey and cinnamon, pheasants in pastry shells, stews rich with wine and rare herbs. The king raises a goblet, to our glory, unaware of the fruit's poison. This was feasting as performance, each course a symbol of dominion, over nature, over wealth, over life itself. And yet, beneath the splendor lay a hidden danger. In an age without understanding of microbes or hygiene, even the most majestic feast teetered on the edge of catastrophe. No kitchen thermometer checked the roast's center. No soap scrubbed the cook's hands. Fish could spoil between the river and the hearth. Meat left cooling on stone tables attracted rats and flies. Desserts infused with raw eggs were little more than a gamble in disguise. Foodborne illness did not distinguish rank. In 1217, it was whispered that a king had died from tainted fruit, a quiet, unglamorous end for a man draped in velvet. His death was likened to a silent assassin hidden in the bowl, sweetened and deadly. Even in splendor, death lurked in every bite. Still, these dangers did little to slow the pace of royal extravagance. The risk was the price of magnificence. If one became ill, it was fate, or bad luck, or the work of an enemy's spell. The court preferred magic over microbiology. And so, goblets clinked, and laughter rang out. A bard sang of Arthur's table as the king dipped roasted apple into wine. Across the hall, a young squire paled and clutched his belly. No one noticed. Ironically, the peasants who dined on roots and barley often faced fewer such threats. Their meals were simpler, boiled longer, touched by fewer hands. Their risks lay not in excess, but in lack. For nobles, the banquet might end in sickness. For peasants, the absence of one could mean starvation. Wealth, it seemed, could buy spectacle but not safety. Beneath the gold and sugar, a feast was still food, and food in the 14th century was never entirely trustworthy. From these gilded chambers of danger and delight, the narrative shifts. It pulls us away from ceremonial excess and back to the reality of daily life, where illness came not just from spoiled swan or overripe pear, but from filth, from rot, from water that should never have been drunk. Now we enter the domain of disease, where cleanliness was a luxury few could afford. The smell strikes first, an acrid mix of smoke, sweat, and something darker, more organic. In the heart of a 1355 urban slum, wedged between leaning timber houses and open gutters, a one-room hovel sags under the weight of too many lives. Inside, a family crowds together near a small hearth. Chickens cluck and peck underfoot, fluttering their wings and scattering straw. A goat bleats softly from the corner where it sleeps beside the youngest child. The air is thick, smoky from the low-burning fire, and heavy with the stench of animal waste that's never truly cleaned, only pushed aside. The dirt floor is damp, muddy where last night's rain crept through the warped wooden walls. The mother stirs a pot of thin stew while swatting away flies with the same hand she uses to adjust the lid. There is no separation here between sleeping and cooking, between food and filth. The mother sighs, "Keep the hens away from the pot," her voice weary. A dog laps water from a cracked bowl near the fire. A toddler, barefoot and coughing, plays with a spoon once used for both feeding and stirring. Nothing is sterile. Everything is shared. Meat is butchered where babies crawl. Buckets of waste are kept indoors until the night's darkness allows a trip to the common gutter. In such conditions, the idea of clean becomes relative. Disease thrives here, invisible but relentless. Flies flit from dung to dinner. Water drawn from the nearby well carries unseen sickness. Boiling helps when there's enough fuel to spare. But every meal remains a gamble. Every bite an invitation to something unseen and lethal. Every meal was a gamble. Every bite a prayer for health. Still, people adapt. Herbs are burned not for medicine, but to mask the odor of rot and refuse. Garlic is prized not just for flavor, but for its imagined protective powers. Boiled onion skins become rudimentary disinfectants. If a child lives past 5, it's a kind of miracle. If a mother keeps her family fed without losing one to fever, she's a silent hero. The poor lived not beside their food, but within it. Slept near the smoke that cooked it, breathed the filth that contaminated it, and ate it anyway. There were no refrigerators, no drains, no soap. Illness was a constant, the ever-present background hum of life. People didn't expect to be healthy, they only hoped not to be worse. This was survival, not safety. And even in such grim reality, there was strength. Parents who sacrificed their portions, children who learned which plants soothed a fever, neighbors who shared when there was nothing left to give. In these conditions, resilience wasn't noble, it was necessary. From these smoky hearths and disease-ridden streets, the narrative now shifts again. As if the hardships of poverty and plague were not enough, we arrive at yet another layer of control. This time, not from nature or misfortune, but from doctrine. The Church's fasting rules dictated not just when to eat, but what could be eaten, tightening the already narrow path of survival. The table is bare, save for a crust of bread and a pot of pottage so thin it barely coats the ladle. A smoky candle flickers in the corner of the dim cottage, casting long shadows over the hunched forms of a family bowing their heads in prayer. It is Lent, 1353, and though hunger has been a constant companion all winter, now even the scraps of comfort, meat, butter, eggs, are forbidden. The husband prays, God will provide, but his eyes betray doubt. The prayer ends in silence. The children look to their parents, not for faith, but for food. Their cheeks are pale, their movements sluggish. The youngest coughs, a dry, hollow sound that echoes louder than it should in the stillness. The mother lifts a spoonful of pottage to her lips, then stops. She gives it to the child instead. Fasting rules are strict. 40 days without meat, dairy, or eggs. Even the broth from a bone is a transgression. Fish is allowed, but only if one can afford it, or live near water. For this peasant family, miles from any coast and too poor to purchase salted herring, Lent is not spiritual discipline. It is sanctioned starvation. The Church called it sacrifice. The people felt it as suffering. To the clergy, abstinence was a path to holiness. To the hungry, it was a divine tax on an already empty stomach. The father clings to faith, believing suffering brings him closer to God. He quotes sermons to his children, trying to soothe their hunger with hope, but his voice trembles when the youngest cries through the night. The mother is torn. She wants to believe, but her dreams betray her. Visions of rich stew and fresh cheese haunt her sleep. She knows where a neighbor hides a bit of lard, kept secretly for the children, a sin if discovered. She dreams of stew, forbidden by the Church's command. Arguments flicker between the couple like the candlelight, not loud but persistent, whispers of doubt, of desperation. Still they comply. To defy the fast is not just a sin, it invites judgment, punishment, even excommunication. and so they suffer quietly, piously, as commanded. But hunger does not respect doctrine. It weakens limbs, clouds thoughts, stunts growth. Children shrink during Lent. Illness strikes more easily. The church offers absolution, but not sustenance. And yet the village endures. Families share what little they can. A woman known for brewing herbal teas distributes them freely. A neighbor smuggles eggs to a sick child's mother. Faith becomes a shared burden, not just an individual test. The story of Lent in 1353 is not one of devout peace. It is one of quiet suffering, of spiritual weight laid upon already burdened shoulders. It is a tale of people who fasted not because they had enough to give up, but because they were told even their scraps were too much. As the fast drags on and the days grow longer, the hope of Easter and spring offers distant relief. But not all food culture in medieval times was marked by deprivation. From within the cloisters of the church itself, another kind of culinary legacy quietly blossomed. The narrator now turns to the monastic world, where gardens, recipes, and recorded knowledge offered a rare source of abundance and preservation. Within the stone walls of a 12th century abbey, nestled between rolling fields and shaded orchards, the rhythm of life moved to a quiet but purposeful beat. Bells tolled softly in the morning mist as monks and nuns rose for prayer and labor. Among them, a humble nun worked in silence, sleeves rolled, hands deep in dough, shaping loaves not just to feed the hungry, but to heal them. Her name is lost to time, but her impact endures. She instructs, spelt strengthens the weak, her hands kneading dough. She was no ordinary baker. She understood that bread could be more than a filler. It could be medicine. In an era where most villagers chewed on coarse barley loaves that crumbled like stone and offered little nourishment, she chose spelt. An ancient grain, hardy and rich in nutrients, spelt was easier on fragile stomachs, especially for the sick and elderly. She cultivated it herself in the abbey's fields, alongside rows of medicinal herbs, sage for digestion, comfrey for wounds, fennel for breath. Her knowledge came from both scripture and soil, passed down in faded manuscripts and refined through experience. When the village children fell ill, or mothers arrived weak from childbirth, she offered bread still warm from the oven, infused with ground herbs. To some, it was nourishment. To others, it was a miracle. Her bread was more than food. It was salvation for the starving. Outside the abbey, famine and plague swept through hamlets. But within, gardens flourished, ovens warmed cold hands, and no one who knocked at the abbey gates left hungry. The monks brewed weak beer for children, safer than water, and the nuns taught young girls how to preserve roots and dry leaves for teas. This was charity, yes, but also quiet innovation. The abbey became more than a place of worship. It was a sanctuary of knowledge and compassion. It chronicled recipes, preserved seeds, and treated food not as a commodity, but as a sacred gift. In times of war and want, when feasting nobles wasted spice-drenched meats and starving peasants chewed on boiled bark, these monastics kept alive the dignity of sustenance. Some called it divine wisdom, others called it science before its time. And in that simple act, a nun kneading dough by candlelight, whispering prayers over loaves she would never eat herself, was a lesson that would echo through centuries, that food, when given with love and wisdom, could become a form of salvation. The legacy of these cloisters is not just found in stone ruins or dusty scrolls. It lives on in our kitchens, in the healing properties of herbs, in the grains rediscovered by modern nutritionists. They were stewards not just of faith, but of survival. But history does not move only in one direction. For every quiet miracle in a monastery, there was a storm gathering on the horizon. As the narrator gently turns the page, we leave behind the warm kitchens of the abbey and step into a darker, more desperate time, the Great Famine. A chapter not of healing but of horror, where rain drowned crops and hunger became the common language of Europe. The year is 1316. The earth is soaked, not with dew but with endless punishing rain. Fields once golden with grain now lie drowned and blackened. In one nameless village, like countless others across Europe, hope has all but vanished. The wind moans through skeletal trees as if mourning the dead before they fall. Smoke no longer rises from hearths, not because firewood is gone, but because there's nothing left to cook. A mother whispers, "Eat this root. It's all we have." Her voice breaking. A child chews slowly on a strip of bark, face hollow, eyes too large for his head. The root is bitter, barely digestible, but it keeps his mouth moving, keeps his mind from the hunger that gnaws deeper than any rat. His father has not returned from the woods. Rumors swirl that a body was found in the next village, picked clean. No one dares ask if it was animal work or something far worse. There is no food. The famine, beginning in 1315 and lasting until 1317, was not just a bad harvest. It was a total collapse. Cold summers, relentless rains, and ruined crops combined in what many believed was divine punishment. It was as if the heavens themselves had turned against humanity. Roads turned to rivers, granaries rotted, and seed was eaten in desperation, ensuring no planting for the next season. Even those with coin could not find bread to buy. In hunger's grip, humanity fought to survive the unthinkable. Church bells tolled endlessly, not for worship, but for death. Mass graves opened across the countryside. Children wasted away in their mothers' arms. Old people refused their share of scraps so the young might have a chance. Livestock perished, fields went untilled, and entire families disappeared from parish records. And yet, some survived. Through shared roots and boiled weeds, through communal foraging and desperate rationing, small clusters of villagers endured. They marked time not by feast days or market cycles, but by when the rain might finally stop. A few whispered psalms, others cursed the skies, most simply waited. Psychological scars lingered long after bellies were filled again. The famine taught a generation that food was never guaranteed, that survival was a gift, not a right. And in that bleakest of winters, the idea of food as comfort, as joy, as celebration, was lost. For those who lived, the memory of grass soup and dead fields never left them. The famine had reshaped their understanding of life itself. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about clinging to one another when the world seemed determined to bury them. And so, as the narrator draws this grim chapter to a close, we look forward, not to more suffering, but to contrast. To a time and place where food is abundant, choice is taken for granted, and hunger is a fading shadow in the history books. The medieval table, once marked by scarcity, filth, and fear, now offers a mirror, one that reflects not only where we've been, but what we too easily forget. A bell dings as automatic doors glide open. Inside, the supermarket hums with life. Cool air greets you. Aisles stretch out like the spokes of a wheel, each one overflowing with color. Bright oranges from Spain, avocados from Mexico, sushi in chilled plastic trays, and freshly baked bread that releases a warm, yeasty sigh into the air. In the produce section, everything gleams, washed, waxed, and arranged like jewels. Today, we pluck apples from distant lands, a miracle to medieval eyes. You can choose between 10 varieties, each labeled with origin, sweetness, and crunch factor. There's no mud on the carrots, no risk of worms in the lettuce, no gamble in the milk you pour for your child. It is a far cry from the world we've just traveled through, a world of moldy grain, rancid meat, and hunger as a daily companion. In medieval Europe, choice was not a luxury. It was non-existent. For most, food came in the form of pottage, a watery stew of whatever could be foraged, scraped, or begged. Bread was hard and coarse, meat was rare, and sugar unknown. Spices were whispers of faraway lands, hoarded by the elite. And hunger, at some point in the year, was guaranteed. But today, food is abundant, safe, and staggeringly varied. Refrigeration, pasteurization, supply chains, and global trade have built a bridge from the bleak uncertainty of the medieval table to the bounty of modern kitchens. It's easy to forget the miracle. We don't pray for the next harvest. We worry about calories. We don't store onions in smokehouses. We compare organic versus GMO. We don't dig for roots in frozen earth. We scroll through apps and summon dinner in minutes. Refrigeration, safety standards, transport logistics, each a link in the chain that lifted us from famine to fullness. But abundance brings its own burdens. Mountains of edible food are discarded daily. Fruit too bruised for display is trashed. Bread goes stale on shelves because a fresher loaf arrives each dawn. Supermarkets overflow while food deserts persist in low-income neighborhoods. And the cost is more than moral. The land groans under the pressure. Pesticides, monocultures, and mass production straining ecosystems. Meat demands more water than it gives back. Plastic packaging pollutes oceans. Climate change looms, echoing the same forces that once triggered medieval famine. Progress has delivered safety and surplus, but it has not made us wise. The medieval world knew hunger, and so they honored food, even if crudely, even if out of fear. Today, we risk forgetting that reverence. So the narrator pauses, not to moralize, but to remind. Yet, in our plenty, we must heed their lessons of care and gratitude, because every grain once counted, every drop of oil was sacred, every crumb was survival. We have crossed the bridge, but must not lose sight of what lies beneath it. Let medieval history serve not just as a tale of struggle, but as a quiet teacher, one that whispers as we glide carts down fluorescent aisles, "This is not normal. This is extraordinary." As we place bananas from Ecuador into baskets in Iceland, or eat strawberries in December, let us remember, this is the dream they never imagined. And now, with the taste of abundance lingering, the narrator turns once again to the past. This time, not to famine or feast, but to justice. To the strange and intimate courtrooms of the manor, where justice was local, swift, and as entangled with food as everything else in medieval life. The manor court convenes just after sunrise. Smoke coils through the timbered beams of the hall, mingling with the breath of frightened peasants gathered below. At the far end, beneath a faded tapestry of a lion rampant, the lord of the manor reclines on a carved oak chair, raised high above his tenants, like a god above mortals. Silence falls as a peasant steps forward, mud still clinging to his boots, cap clutched in trembling hands. The bailiff reads the charge. 1 cow, property of Aldrich son of Wulfric, strayed into the barley field of his lordship. Damage done. 3 stalks trampled. The hall murmurs, amused at the triviality, but no one laughs aloud. The lord's face darkens. The lord barks, "Your cow defiled my field," as the peasant bows. Aldrich kneels. "She broke loose, my lord. I tethered her, but the rope—" "No excuses," the lord interrupts. "You will pay a fine of 10 pence, or surrender the beast." 10 pence, nearly half a month's wages. The room remains still, the tension so thick it muffles breath. No one questions the judgment. They never do. To speak out is to risk worse. And all know this court is no court of law. It is a performance of power. The punishment may seem absurd, even cruel. A cow straying through a gap in a fence becomes an offense punishable by branding or confiscation. But in the tightly wound world of feudalism, it made perfect sense. Discipline preserved order. And order kept the manor running like a well-wound clock, each cog in place, each peasant chained to his duty. That cow wasn't just an animal. It was labor, livelihood, milk for children, dung for fields. And so too was the punishment more than monetary. It was psychological. A reminder that nothing on the land moved without the Lord's consent. Justice here was a whip, cracking to keep the lowly in line. Manor courts met regularly to adjudicate everything, from grazing rights and fence repairs, to theft, drunkenness, or gossip. But while the crimes varied, the judgments rarely did. The hierarchy was sacred. Lords judged, peasants obeyed. And so Aldrich stumbles out of the hall, 10 pence poorer, his head low, not just from shame, but from a centuries-old system pressing down like a stone. His cow waits tied outside, ears flicking flies, unaware of her part in a ritual that reinforced who mattered and who did not. In this world, justice wasn't blind. It stared straight at you from atop a dais, robed in velvet and backed by armed stewards. Its purpose wasn't fairness, it was function. Keep the fields plowed, the rents paid, the peace unbroken. The manor court wasn't about right or wrong. It was about control. Like a chain forged of custom and fear, the court bound each soul to soil and servitude. Yet even here, under the weight of injustice, there were glimmers of order, a rudimentary sense of consequence, a framework that, for better or worse, gave medieval life its rhythm. Now, as the echo of the Lord's verdict fades, the narrator turns toward an older form of judgment, one even more symbolic and far more costly. A system where justice came in coin, not control. A system called vergeld, the price of a life itself. A damp wind presses through the chapel yard, bending the brittle grass. Mourners gather in silence, their heads bowed not only in grief, but in powerlessness. A young peasant, no more than 20, lies in a crude wooden box. His mother clutches a woolen scrap from his cloak. His brother stares ahead, jaw tight with rage. At the edge of the crowd, the cause of this sorrow arrives on horseback. A noble, cloak embroidered, boots clean despite the rain. He dismounts with ease, not shame. No apology passes his lips, only a pouch of silver. The noble sneers, "Take your silver and be silent," as tears fall. 3 shillings. That was the price for the life of a poor man, paid not to the dead, but to the living, as though coin could plug the void he left behind. This was vergeld, a word from the old tongue meaning man price. In medieval law, every man had a monetary value, not based on virtue or character, but on status. Nobles? Worth pounds of silver. Clergy? Higher still. Peasants, women, even children, all assigned a price, as if they were livestock on a ledger. It was a system designed, at least on paper, to prevent blood feuds. Kill a man, and you owed his kin a fixed sum. Justice through compensation. But justice, true justice, rarely trickled down. In this case, the noble's carriage had veered off the road, plowing into a peasant cart. The boy, hauling sacks of grain for his father, had no chance. Crushed beneath hooves. Witnesses were plenty, but what did that matter? The noble claimed the peasant startled his horses. The steward recorded it. The court accepted it. And so, 3 shillings changed hands, and the matter was closed. In vergeld, a life's worth was measured in coin, not dignity. The injustice wasn't just in the act, it was in the scale itself. Weighted not with fairness, but with hierarchy. A noble's death demanded blood or treasure. A peasant's, a token, a gesture. Imagine a scale. One side holds a bar of silver, the other, a human heart. In the medieval world, the scale always tipped toward the weight of privilege. The heart, however heavy with grief, carried less. Vergeld turned justice into accounting. It codified inequality not as a side effect, but as a principle. And worse, it normalized it. To be poor was to be cheap. To be rich was to be invulnerable. Like ink on vellum, Vergeld wrote inequality into law and into memory. Even centuries later, the echoes remain. Do we not still see systems where worth is assigned unequally? Where money buys silence or immunity, or a second chance denied to others? The mother clutches the silver as if it might bring her son back. But silver is cold. Her tears are not. In the background, the priest says a prayer, not for justice, but for peace. It is all he can offer. And so, life in the Middle Ages marches on. A hierarchy upheld by law, enforced by power, and sanctified by custom. Now, the narrator turns to a place where justice took a different form, divine, unworldly, and terrifying, where fate was placed not in a lord's hands or a silver coin, but in boiling water and searing iron, a place called Trial by Ordeal. The year is 1360. Inside the towering stone cathedral, light slants through stained glass windows, casting ruby and sapphire hues upon the cold flagstones. The scent of incense hangs thick in the air, mingling with the tension that fills the sacred space. Cloaked priests move solemnly, murmuring prayers, but their eyes are fixed not on the heavens, rather on the trembling figure before them. A woman, her face pale with fear, stands shackled at the center of the nave. Her crime? Whispers of heresy, rumors of healing herbs and night prayers outside the approved rites. In an age of faith as law, suspicion alone was enough. The Inquisitor intones, "Confess or face God's wrath," his eyes cold. Before her, a cleric dressed in velvet delivers her fate, not with rage, but with practiced calm. Her confession, he says, will save her soul. The rack, should she refuse, will cleanse it of sin. She is just a peasant. She has no advocate, no silver to bribe mercy, no family of status to plead her cause. Not far from this grim scene, tucked behind a chapel wall, another figure kneels. A nobleman, accused of murder, has claimed sanctuary. Under church law, no earthly authority may seize him here. Within the hallowed walls, even a killer finds peace, if he has the name and wealth to demand it. Sanctuary for one, torment for another. Such was the church's justice. The church in medieval Europe held immense power. It was the soul of the community, the voice of God, the promise of salvation. It offered alms to the poor, sanctuary to the desperate, and burial rites to all. But it was also judge, jury, and sometimes executioner. Cathedral courts ruled on everything from marriage to morality. Priests interpreted law, heard confessions, and imposed penance. Yet, they too were bound by status and politics. The divine mission often blurred with earthly advantage. The Inquisition, born of holy purpose, became a weapon. What began as spiritual guidance too often turned into persecution of healers, thinkers, and those who simply didn't fit the mold. Torture, though officially condemned, became routine. Confession was not coaxed, it was extracted. Meanwhile, the doctrine of sanctuary offered immunity. But like many things, its shelter leaned heavily toward those who mattered most. A beggar might be dragged from the altar. A baron. He could feast in the cloister for weeks before walking free. This contradiction, mercy and malice entwined, defined the church's role in justice. It was a mirror of heaven, but built on the flaws of men. Still, many believed. Truly, deeply. Not all clerics were cruel. Not all inquisitors blind. But the system, at its core, echoed the feudal world it inhabited. Unequal, unforgiving, and cloaked in sacred authority. And so, as the woman's fate is sealed, and the noble sleeps in safety, the narrator turns the page once more, toward the outward signs of power. Robes, silk, furs not just for warmth, but for control. A world where clothing became law and fashion, a battlefield of class. The age of sumptuary laws awaits. The year is 1363. The cobbled streets of a bustling English market town echo with the clatter of hooves and the shouts of vendors hawking salted fish, woven baskets, and bolts of wool. Among the crowd stands a man who draws more than casual glances. He is not a nobleman, but he wears scarlet, a color reserved for the elite. His tunic gleams like a rose in full bloom, dyed in costly cochineal and trimmed with fur. Passers-by stare. Some murmur. Others look away. And then, from across the square, a sharp voice rings out. The official snaps, "Scarlet is for lords, not you," as the merchant flinches. Two town officers approach, robes flapping, eyes scanning the offending garment. The merchant, a prosperous man but not titled, knows what's coming. He protests mildly, saying he bought the cloth legally, earned with honest coin. It matters not. In this world, cloth is not just cloth. It is declaration, defiance, and in this case, a fine. Welcome to the world of sumptuary laws, medieval society's wardrobe police. These laws dictated who could wear what, based not on taste, but on rank. Scarlet, velvet, sable, cloth of gold, for nobles only. Silk-lined hoods, long-toed shoes, certain sleeve lengths, forbidden to anyone below a knight. To break these rules wasn't just fashion faux pas, it was social insubordination. The logic? If commoners dressed like lords, how would order survive? If one could look powerful, what would stop him from acting so? Cloth became a cage, trapping each in their place. The penalties varied. Fines for first-time offenders, public humiliation for repeat dress code criminals. In some towns, tailors could be punished for making forbidden garments. Entire professions were roped into preserving the visible hierarchy, and it wasn't just about color or fabric. The laws reached absurd levels of specificity. A merchant's wife could wear fur, but only if it wasn't ermine. A knight could wear velvet, but only on feast days. A yeoman? Best stick to undyed wool. The absurdity was clear even then. Pamphlets and tavern songs mocked the laws. "Let him eat cabbage and crimson," one ballad quipped, "so long as he bows to the Duke." Yet the laws persisted for centuries, rewritten and reinforced across England, France, Italy, wherever medieval elites feared erosion of status. Sumptuary laws were the painted walls of society, each brushstroke a border. To dress above one's rank was to scale the wall, to imagine equality. The ruling class would not have it. And so, our merchant pays the fine. He is lucky. It could have been worse. His scarlet tunic is stripped away, replaced by coarse brown wool. His offense is noted in the town ledger. He walks home chastened, his pride wounded more than his purse. Around him the town continues, a world where the thread count in your sleeve could spark a scandal. But as the sun sets over the thatched rooftops, another form of control descends, not by color, but by time. Bells toll in the tower, and town criers call the hour. The narrator turns now toward curfew laws, the rules that silenced the night and shadowed every street after dark. York, 1348. The Black Death has crept into England, but life, such as it is, must go on. In the ink-dark hours before dawn, a man moves quietly through the alleys behind Stonegate. He carries a bundle of firewood, his boots soft on the damp cobbles, his breath puffing visibly in the cold air. His destination, the small bakery tucked beneath his home, where he hopes to begin kneading and firing his loaves before the town wakes. But as he turns the corner near St. Michael the Belfry, a sudden flare of lantern light blinds him. Steel glints. A halberd blocks his path. The watchman growls, "No fire after dark," as the baker pleads. The town's night watch, a gang of armed, grim-faced enforcers, surrounds him. He explains in hushed tones, the flour delivery was late, the dough won't rise without warmth, the townsfolk will have no bread at sunrise. He gestures to his apron, the soot on his arms, the honest tools of his trade. It makes no difference. Since the institution of strict curfew laws, no one is allowed out after the church bell rings at sundown, not without written permission from the bailiff or a very high title. The risk, they say, is too great. Darkness invites danger. Thieves, heretics, dissent. Fire after curfew? Even worse. A single ember could set a street ablaze, and in a time of timber and thatch, that meant ruin. The baker is fined 2 pence, an amount small to a lord, but devastating to a man who relies on daily sales to survive. He is warned. Next time, the punishment could be flogging, or time in the stocks, or worse. Night, in medieval towns, was not a time of rest, but a legal prison. Once the sun dipped behind the rooftops, freedom was suspended, lamps were doused, shutters were latched. Only the church, nobles, or soldiers could roam without fear of the watch. The irony? Many labors required early rising. Bakers, millers, shepherds. But the law did not account for necessity, only control. And so, honest work became suspicious in the eyes of the law. Night was not rest, but a time of suspicion and chains. To keep order, the law turned shadows into shackles, A man with good intentions could be punished like a criminal, because the clock, not the deed, determined guilt. The baker trudges home, firewood dropped, dignity dampened. He knows he'll lose customers tomorrow. But more than that, he fears the growing sense that survival requires obedience, not effort. Above him, the cathedral looms, its spire cutting the sky like a sword. Somewhere inside, monks are chanting matins. They are allowed to rise before dawn. He is not. And as the last bell fades into the night, the narrator turns now toward another set of shackles, less visible, but equally powerful. The laws that governed love and union. We move now to marriage in the Middle Ages, where consent, control, and class collided. In the quiet edge of a 1355 English village, under the low branches of an ancient elm, two figures meet in secret, their hands clasped tightly, eyes locked in a silent promise. William, the blacksmith's son, and Eleanor, the Reeves' niece, have grown up together, once as playmates, now as something far deeper. Tonight, they whisper vows to one another, not yet married, not officially, but in their hearts, bound already. Their joy, however, wears the heavy cloak of fear. The church has spoken. They are fourth cousins, too closely related under canon law. Though not siblings or first cousins, the rules of consanguinity stretch far, sometimes to the 7th degree. The law is clear. The priest warns, your blood is too close, dashing their hopes. To wed legally, they would need a papal dispensation, a document from faraway Rome, expensive and slow to acquire. For peasants like them, the cost might equal several years' earnings. Worse still, they require the permission of their lord, who views Eleanor as a valuable match for another man, someone with more animals, more acreage, more to offer him in return. Love, in medieval England, was rarely just about love. Marriage was a transaction, a contract shaped by law, religion, and economics. The church ruled on spiritual fitness. The manor lord ruled on social utility. If either objected, affection had no say. The young couple tries all routes. They plead with the local priest, who sympathizes but cannot defy the rules. They write, clumsily, to the bishop, requesting guidance. They even consider fleeing to another village and marrying in secret, a dangerous act that could cost them their homes, their honor, even their place in the community. Their love was a rebellion against law's cold grip. The rules, they realize, are not merely lines on parchment, but walls built around the heart, barriers dressed in sacred and legal language. Love is a garden, yes, but surrounded by a locked gate, and the keys are held by distant men with titles and power. Yet still, they persist. Eleanor visits a traveling friar known to carry favors from sympathetic clergy. William sells a prized tool to pay for the courier's trip to the bishop's seat. In their struggle, they are not alone. Many in the village whisper support, recalling their own forbidden romances, their own negotiated unions. Their resilience becomes quiet defiance. The metaphor of the locked gate shifts, not just a symbol of restriction, but also of endurance. Because even behind a locked gate, flowers can grow, resilient, reaching through stone. Eventually, months later, a message arrives. A reluctant bishop, moved by their tenacity and perhaps swayed by a modest bribe, grants local dispensation. Their union will not be celebrated with grandeur, but it will be recognized. In the village church, beneath carved stone saints, they finally speak their vows aloud. The same priest who once warned them now offers a small, approving nod. In the end, love bends the law, not with force, but with persistence. Yet as the bells toll for their union, the narrator reminds us, marriage was not only a personal matter. It shaped inheritance, legacy, land. And now we shift to the next arena of medieval life, the legal labyrinth of inheritance laws, where family ties could bring fortune or fracture. In the cold stillness of a stone manor in 1360, a family gathers by the hearth. The father, gray-bearded and stern, sits in a carved oak chair, the family seal beside him. His voice carries the weight of custom, not emotion, as he delivers the words that will shape their lives. "The land is yours, eldest," he says solemnly, placing his hand on the shoulder of his firstborn. The younger son lowers his gaze. He does not argue. He dares not. For this is the law of primogeniture, and in this world it is as immovable as the hills. Only the eldest son inherits the estate, the fields, the tools, the livestock, the name. All of it. The younger sons, no matter their merit or dreams, are left to find another path, one usually dictated by family strategy, not personal desire. For this boy, it means the clergy. One son's gain was another's exile, bound by law's decree. The family nods in agreement, some with pride, others with quiet sorrow. There is no room on the farm for two masters, they say. Division of land would mean weakness, parcels too small to sustain life. Better to send the second son to the church, the third to a night service if possible, the rest to beg for fate's favor. Primogeniture is presented as practical, even noble. But to the son now staring at a future behind monastery walls, it feels like a sentence. A life traded not for calling, but for survival. He is 15, his hands calloused from labor, not scripture. He has no love for cloisters or Latin prayers. But he is told this is honorable, that God has a plan, even if that plan begins in rejection. The family's single candle of inheritance burns bright for one, while the others are left in shadow. The mother weeps quietly. She remembers his laughter in the fields, his gentleness with animals. But she too bows to the system. To challenge it would mean scandal, or worse, ruin. So the boy leaves. Given a blessing and a small satchel of bread, he walks the dirt road to the abbey. The manor behind him looms in silence, now no longer home, and he is not alone in this fate. Across England, and indeed much of Europe, thousands of second sons tread the same path, not from piety, but from dispossession. This legal structure not only shaped families, but reinforced hierarchy. The eldest son's wealth meant future power. The others fed the church, the army, or the towns. Inheritance, more than any sword or sermon, upheld the social order. Still, some younger sons found meaning in their imposed callings. Some even rose high in ecclesiastical or royal ranks. But for most, their lives began in someone else's shadow. As the boy reaches the abbey gates, a monk greets him without question. Another son claimed by the law. And with this, the narrator begins the final reflection on what these laws, injustices, and resilience say about the enduring legacy of medieval justice. The river ran cold beneath a gray sky in the year 1350. A crowd gathered in tense silence along the banks, their breath misting in the morning chill. In the shallows, a woman stood trembling, bound at the wrists, a stone tied to her waist. Her crime? A neighbor's accusation of witchcraft. Her trial? The judgment of water. The priest raised his hand and invoked divine truth. Then, without ceremony, the woman was lowered into the river. She did not float. As she disappeared beneath the surface, her final breath lost to the current, the silence broke. "God has spoken," murmured a man near the front. The priest nodded solemnly. She was innocent, because she had sunk. But she was also dead. This was justice once, a system that claimed to seek divine will but often served fear, power, and prejudice. Trial by ordeal, arbitrary laws, and status-based punishment defined the medieval approach to right and wrong. What mattered wasn't truth, it was station, gender, hearsay, and fate. The crowd dispersed, some grieving, others indifferent. Her name faded from memory. But her story, like so many, became part of a larger current, one that would shape the future. That current still flows. Today we live in a world where justice tries to wear a blindfold. Due process, equality before the law, the right to defend oneself. These are gifts hard-earned, carved from centuries of suffering. We no longer drown women to prove their innocence, nor flog the poor for stealing bread, nor fine a man for the color of his coat. We debate fairness now with laws, not lashes. And yet, the river's echo remains. Bias still haunts the halls of justice, and power still whispers where it shouldn't. The journey is not over, but the path we walk was paved by those who had none. The peasant fined for his cow's misstep. The mother who whispered comfort over bark and roots during famine. The woman who drowned not for guilt, but for fear. Their pain was not in vain. The river of justice flows forward, winding through time. Once cruel and chaotic, it now seeks clarity and compassion, however slowly. Each reform, each protest, each law written in pursuit of fairness deepens its channel. We owe them our gratitude and our vigilance. Tonight, the narrator says gently, sleep knowing their suffering paved our path to fairness. But do not sleep too soundly. Let their stories remind us that justice is a living thing, fragile and precious. It must be guarded, not with swords, but with truth, empathy, and courage. We must dream not just of rest, but of a future where no one sinks unseen, unheard, unloved. So, as the candles dim and silence settles, the narrator offers one last thought. May your dreams be filled not with gallows or chains, but with courts where every voice matters, and rivers that carry only light. Good night.